All right, how's it going, Neil? So today we're going to be going over how to completely replace Dropbox with the Synology NAS. And this video is something I've been meaning to do for a while because Dropbox has done a few really sketchy things in the past year or so that have made it really hard to use them as a company, and they're starting to really just shut off their top users. So Dropbox back in the day used to have an unlimited plan, but now they're starting to essentially just knock users off by calling them up and saying, hey, your contract's going to renew. It is now going to be $10,000 a year instead of what it was like $1,000, because these are their top users who are using the most amount of space. That is absolutely on Dropbox for claiming they had an unlimited program, because anybody who ever sets up an unlimited program, it is bound to get used like crazy. And so for the past probably year and a half, I get about 2 clients a month who have been kicked off Dropbox and are told that they have to either pay an exorbitant amount of money or find a different solution. Another thing that has driven me crazy about what Dropbox does is it has started hijacking your entire computer if you let it. This is something that people who are pretty tech savvy will be able to notice and kind of get around. But what it does is if you install the Dropbox client on your computer and you just let it do what it's recommending you do, it is going to take your desktop, your documents, all of your key folders, and change them to Dropbox folders and symlink everything. So it's literally hijacking all of your files, and they'll say, oh, you're out of space, upgrade to the higher tier, and will make it really hard to uninstall. I've had to undo this for multiple clients who were just using Dropbox to share files with people, and then just by following the steps that they're recommending you do, which is very simple clicking, it is claiming to be a backup that actually just hijacks all your data. It's not backing up your files because it is becoming the only copy of your files. It is that really shady business practice where it is forcing their users locked into their system by kind of holding their computer and files ransom, because now if you don't pay, it is cloud synced your files and you have to download everything or you're going to lose all your files. That is one of those things that drives me crazy because it's just hijacking your computer and doing things that's claiming it's a backup when it's actually just taking all your files and will remove them from the hard drive and only have them cloud available. And so if you cancel your Dropbox plan, you would lose access to those files without downloading them first. Whole bunch of stuff, but this is how we're going to go through and actually get rid of that process and be able to completely replace Dropbox with a Synology NAS. And we are primarily going to be focusing on an application called Synology Drive to do all of this. So this right here is a DS923 Plus. I've got 4 hard drives in there. That is giving me a total of 24 terabytes of usable space. There are 4 8-terabyte drives in a RAID 5 configuration. So that is a whole bunch of space and is all going to be locally accessible. So now, even if your internet speed is really slow, whenever you're home, you're gonna have fast local access because you don't have to download your files from some random cloud server. Instead, you're just downloading them from within the network. And so part of this tutorial, I'm just gonna assume you've already set up the NAS. If you need help with that, just Google how to set up a NAS and you're probably gonna find one of my tutorials. Follow that, and we're just going to do the basic setup here. And now what we need to do is we need to start getting our data out of Dropbox. And this is actually a really nice program that Synology has called CloudSync that's going to do that exactly for us. It is going to be able to just download and sync our files so we can actually continue to use Dropbox while this is running. So if you've got 5 or 6 terabytes or more, you can just let this run and keep using Dropbox, and it will be updated as time goes on. So we're just going to go into the package center and search out CloudSync. By the way, these exact same steps can be used to replace Google Drive or pretty much everything else. Everything but macOS iCloud Drive or Apple iCloud Drive, because iCloud is a walled garden. They do not have an API to download files, but every other major cloud provider CloudSync will work with. All right, so now that we've got it installed, we kind of need to sit down and figure out how we're going to replace our Dropbox. And what I would recommend doing is log into Dropbox and kind of figure out your folder structure. So as you can see, I've only got 2 folders here, but the biggest difference between how you set up the NAS and how you set up Dropbox is going to be how permissions work. The easiest way to manage permissions on Synology are going to be with shared folders. If you can, stick with that because it makes your life a lot easier. So say that there's this key data folder right here that only I need access to, but this Joshua Tree folder, the whole company needs access to. I would really recommend sitting down and figuring out the proper folder structure to set up to make it very easy where you can have maybe 4 or 5 shared folders that all have different levels of permission applied to them. So you can say these people have access to this, these people have access to this. If you need a lot more in-depth permissions, there's a thing called Advanced Share Permissions that I will leave a link down in the description below to how to set up. But just know, it is a flip from how Dropbox does permissions. Dropbox does permissions, just any folder anywhere can be set up with any permissions. Whereas Synology uses what's called Windows ACLs, which is really useful for mapping drives, but it's kind of a top-down view. And so the permissions are different, and that is going to be your #1 sticking point if you want to convert from Dropbox to Synology Drive. I'll leave a link to my video that describes all that and kind of works through those permissions there. But for now, we're just going to pretend like these are our 2 key company files. These are just random things I threw in Dropbox just to get some stuff done. And we're going to set up 2 different permission sets for these. So because key data and Joshua Tree have 2 different levels of permissions, we're going to set them up as shared folders. And so we're going to start off right off the bat. You can ignore all of these guys right here. We're just going to be focusing on the ones for Joshua Tree and key data. So what I would recommend doing is coming into shared folder and actually creating a new shared folder for those new levels of permission. It's going to make it a lot easier to kind of separate stuff on out. And generally, if you can have about 5 shared folders, that's where that permission level works great. So if you've got kind of 5 different levels of permission, accounting, engineering, whatever, that will make your life a lot easier, and you won't have to go to shared folder permissions, which are very powerful, but very time intensive to set up and understand originally. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create Joshua Tree. Going to give it a recycling bin, checksum. And now I'm not going to touch permissions here just yet. I'm going to wait until I've got the groups and everything set up to do that. So I've created Joshua Tree, and now I'm going to create one called key data. And these are representing the multiple folders that we want to sync in Dropbox for shared folder permissions. You can also really customize this however you like and really just get it tuned out. I would highly recommend spending a little bit of time figuring out the exact folder structure you want and then setting it up. And key data, nobody else is going to have access to. All right, great. So now let's go ahead and start syncing down those folders. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and open up Cloud Sync. And right here, we can see there's 2 options for Cloud Sync and Dropbox, either Dropbox Standard or Dropbox Teamspace. It's whichever one you have a contract with. If it's a personal account, it'll be Dropbox. If it's a business account, probably Teamspace. Dropbox has grandfathered in 80 different times, so it does heavily depend on when you signed up for Dropbox, and how you're set up can be very different. But we're just going to set up standard Dropbox. If one of them doesn't work, it's probably the other one. Now it's going to go ahead and ask us to log in. Just log in with the account you'd like to do and hit allow. And just click on through. Now, give it a connection name. This connection name is going to be for the account. So this is Will's Dropbox account. And now we're going to set up our first sync task. And that is going to be for every shared folder, and every single folder we want to sync that's different will be a new sync task. So we just simply select a local path and a remote path. So for our local path, we're going to go ahead and start with that Joshua Tree folder. So I could either select the shared folder at the top level right here, or have a folder within there that I wanted to sync. You can really customize this out however you want to, and just get it as organized as you like, where you've got a many to many mapping where all the data just syncs in perfectly. But I'm just going to select Joshua Tree right here. And remote path, I'm not going to choose the root folder, which would be all of Dropbox. Remember, we want to have 2 different folders with 2 different levels of permission, so I'm going to select that Joshua Tree folder in Dropbox. Now for sync direction, We could do bidirectional, which is probably what you want to do, or download remote changes only. This is useful if you're using Google Drive and have a lot of stuff as Google Docs that you want converted to Word documents. But we're going to do a bidirectional sync, and you can schedule it to happen out of business hours if you wanted to. There's also some advanced settings here to really customize out whatever in the world you might need. But we're just going to go ahead and hit done. And we're going to have a little pop-up in the upper right-hand corner over here that'll show the sync status. It's just downloading all those files from Dropbox. There was not much there, so it happened very quickly. So now I'm going to go ahead and close all this out, and we should see in File Station, that Joshua Tree folder, boom, everything's exactly as it was in Dropbox. And now in the meantime, if I delete a file here, they will then be deleted over here. So they are going to be fully in sync, which is a great way to get set up and running. And so you don't have to convert everybody over all at the exact same time. All right, great. So that's our first sync job done. Now we're going to go ahead and set up our next one. Now that we've already connected Dropbox, we can just go into our task list and create another one. And this is going to be for that key data folder. And the exact same settings here. You can make this as complex or as easy as you like, and it really just comes down to what kind of permissions you need to set up and what kind of organization you'd like to switch over to. All right, great. Our data is now out of Dropbox and ready to go on our NAS. Now, let's go ahead and start making this and setting this live. And to do this, we're really going to be using Synology Drive if you want remote people to be able to access these files, or if you have an office and these files only need to be accessed locally or from a company VPN, you can just use what's called SMB and map the network drive. So mapping a network drive is much, much easier. Essentially, the NAS will just show up as an external hard drive to your computer, and everything will work just like that without the need to sync or anything like that. But we are going to set this up like Dropbox, where we actually want to be able to sync files to our computer and all of those kinds of things. But either way, the very first place we need to start is setting up our permissions. Because as I said earlier, we were just kind of skipping that until we got it set up. But now we want to set up groups. So that way we can say, hey, these people have access to this folder, these people have access to this folder. And to do that, we're going to go into users and group and create new groups. So here I had already set up some groups right here for messing around. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. As you might have been able to tell, this is my tutorial box. But we're just going to go ahead and create a group for Joshua Tree. This could be whatever you want it to be, and it really comes down to making sense for your organization. Maybe you've got engineering, and engineering can see all drawings plus, I don't know, company data. There's a million ways you can handle this, but just setting up the groups will make it a lot easier. So that way when you get a new employee or just a new user, you can just add them to groups and all permissions come in very nicely. So I'm going to give both Bob and Sally, I'm going to put them in that group. And for Joshua Tree, we're going to give them read-write access to Joshua Tree. So this is how we manage all those permissions. And so now we can specify what permissions that Joshua Tree group has access to. Now, key data is going to be reserved just for me. So if I wanted to, I could create another group for that or just assign it manually to myself. Now, go ahead and create any users you want here. It's very easy. Username, password, and group is all you really should have to do. And then you can always customize permissions past that. And that is the very basics of how we're going to set up those groups. And once again, customize this to your heart's content. The next thing we want to go ahead and do is actually set up Synology Drive. And if you haven't already, go into Package Center and download Synology Drive. And just hit download. You're going to update to the newest version. And this is what is really built to be a Google Drive and a Dropbox replacement. There is both a web client where you can share files with people and they can interact with them on the web. They even have an Office component if you wanted to actually also be able to use simple documents, much like Google Drive and Google Docs. And they also have the ability to share and sync files to local computers. Another thing I'm going to show is if you want to, you can also customize this with your own domain. So what that means is, say you've got a company domain and you really want this to be what people see, and this is primarily used to share files with people around the world. You could actually point for me it would be files.spacerex.co to the NAS and actually use that for Synology Drive. And so if you typed into your web browser files.spacerex.co or whatever domain you've got, we can set it up where it just goes straight to Synology Drive. I'm going to show that later on here, but if you want people to be able to access this outside of the local network, you need to either use VPN, port forwarding, which is that domain that I talked about, or Quick Connect. So I'm going to talk about that all later on and actually show how you can do that. And it's one of my favorite ways to set up a business. So that way, when you share a link to a file with somebody, it's branded as you and it comes across as you. Now that Synology Drive is installed, in my case updated, we can go ahead and open it up. And I had some things set up here already, so I'm just going to disable them. But as the first time you install Synology Drive, when you open up Synology Drive Admin Console, you will see under your team folders, by default, the My Drive folder has been enabled. My Drive is essentially like Google Drive's personal space. Every single user on the NAS gets their own section. So that's great for scratch working, backups, photos, things like that that not everybody needs to see, but they can still be shared with other people. Then team folders are basically folders that are shared with other people. So anytime you have a shared folder that you want to use in Synology Drive, you come in here and you enable it as a team folder, which we will be doing for those 2 folders we created for this. One thing to note, the versioning through here is quite slow if you've got over 100,000 files. So if you've got tons and tons of files, I would not recommend enabling versioning when you come in here. However, if you've got on the order of under 50,000 files, versioning can be quite useful, but just be sure to rotate them. Once we set this up, it is going to start indexing, and that will take a while, and just let it run, especially if you've got tons and tons of files. What it's doing is it's building a search index, it's building a folder structure, and it's building a database and previews and all these things to make it so that you can use it like Google Drive. I have very few files in here, so it ran very quickly. So now we can go ahead and open up Synology Drive. And this is what your users will see. They will see the My Drive folder, where that's their own like scratch space, where they can share with other people and all those good things. And they can also come into the team folder, and any folders that are as team folders that they have access to, they will see here. Very much similar to Dropbox and how all that works. So you can pull these guys on up and view them. It's got a browser right here. And then in the lower right hand corner, we can see that it has mobile apps and desktop apps. So you can get this on your phone as well as on your computer to do those syncings just like you do with Dropbox or Google Drive. You can also share publicly with other people or just other users on the NAS. So if I wanted Sally to be able to see a few files in here that she didn't have access to, I could select them. Basically just create a folder, move those on in there, and allow Sally to see them by hitting share, permissions, only invitees can access, and type in the name. And then you can give different levels of permission. And now even if Sally did not have access to Joshua Tree, in her shared with me, she would see Sally files, and I can see that I shared them with her right here. And then you can remove them out there by removing those users. So that is how you can share it with specific user accounts. We can also share them publicly by hitting share, public link. By default, you'll see it's using the Quick Connect ID, but we can set this up to be a personal domain or anything like that, depending on how you're doing. We're going to talk about that in the next steps. So for now, we're just going to pretend like we're using the Quick Connect ID. Watch till the end of this video to see how to set up your personal domain. So that is how that whole process works. The next thing we want to go ahead and do is install Synology Drive on our computer to do those syncings. I'm going to kind of rush through it a little bit here just to kind of show the basics. I have a very in-depth video that I will leave a link down in the description below for how to use Synology Drive for business that really shows you in-depth on how to use the client. So if you look right here, I've actually already installed Synology Drive and I use it personally for my own stuff, but we'll go ahead and show you how you'll set it up with another user. So when you first install the application, it's going to bring you to a window that asks for these three things: username, password, and Quick Connect ID or address. So if we set up that customized domain, we would enter files.spacerex.co here. But in this case, I'm going to just use the local IP address and then my username and password. I'm going to say not now, proceed. If you use Quick Connect, it is going to be the easiest thing, but I'm going to talk about all those options later on. Now, for every single team folder that you want to sync, you create a new sync job. And this is where you've got two options. You can either cloud sync it, where all the files are only stored on your computer when you open them. That's the exact same thing that Google Drive and iCloud Drive and OneDrive all do, where it's that cloud icon. Dropbox does the same. And so then when you double click on a file, it's downloaded on demand. Or you can full sync it, which is really useful for video production, where you can actually just say, hey, I want to always have access to this file. So if you've got a working folder, you can just sync that fully. And that way, any jobs you throw at your editor, they will just be able to have. What we're going to do is we're going to select what folder we want to sync. So you choose Joshua Tree or a subfolder as well. This is super useful for remote video editors, where if you've got every editor has their own project, you'd essentially have an editing folder, 12 folders in there, each for different editors, and they full sync those. And then we'll go ahead and just choose that folder. And now we're going to choose where it is on our computer. For Windows, you can do this and actually choose where you want it, and you can organize how you like to. But Mac OS, if you were using on-demand sync, it's actually going to use the iCloud protocol built in. So you just give it a name. So this is where you don't have to choose where it is. Mac OS on-demand sync, you have to put it in the specific folder because that's the only place Apple allows you to do it. If you do a full sync, you can choose any folder on your computer to sync, and actually a great way to actually get files up to the NAS as well. Windows, on-demand sync, and full sync both allow you to choose whatever folder and actually convert back and forth between. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose that. And now if I click on it, we will see it has brought me over to that folder. First time on Mac OS, it'll ask you to allow. And we can see these cloud icons right here where we do get a preview, but if we actually try to open up full resolution, it's first going to download it and then give it to us. So it works exactly like Dropbox and all those other cloud syncs do. We can also share directly from here, pin it immediately, or free up space. All the options in the world. Tons of stuff you can do here. I'm not going to go into it here because I've got a better video that kind of goes over it really in depth. But this is how you can use the client. And if you want more shared folders, you just create more sync jobs. You can also create backup tasks, which are very useful to make sure employees-based folders are backed up. And it's very useful to put those in the home folders. So you can create one here. And I would be able to back up maybe my documents folder or downloads to my home folder, continuous. And just like that, in the background, it's constantly going to be backing up my downloads folder to the NAS in my home folder. So that's all I'm going to spend time with for the actual Synology Drive client for computer. There's a mobile app, there's a whole bunch of stuff, tons of options, but that is the basics, and it really allows you to customize your heart's content. All right, so now a couple of quick housekeeping things that we want to do to make sure that our data is protected. First off, we are going to enable snapshots. So go into the Package Center, download snapshot replication, and we are going to select those key folders and create a snapshot task. You can make them immutable. There's a ton of stuff you can do here. These are not a backup, but what these will allow you to do is no matter what any of your users mess up, you will be able to undo it. I'm just going to rush through this really quickly and do some very basic settings here, which will give us 7 days to undo any deletes or any modifications any of my users make. So that is that piece right there. I've got a ton of guides on snapshots. They're really powerful. You're going to forget about them until you need them, and then they're there. And it really protects you from ransomware and somebody getting a virus on their computer. And that virus encrypts every single file it has access to, encrypts all the files in the NAS. This allows you to restore it without having to go to backups. This is not a backup though. Neither is RAID. RAID is not a backup. You now have your own data in your hands. You need to back this data up if it's critical for your company or your personal life. If it's just scratch data and you really do not care if it gets deleted and lost, that is up to you. But I would highly recommend backing up your critical data. And there's a couple different options. The cheapest, if you're going to have more than about 10 terabytes, is to buy a second NAS. Does not need to be as high spec, but buy it and stick it at a friend, family member's house, or if you're at the business, bring it home with you. And that way it is an off-site backup. A great place to start as well is just buy an external hard drive. Once again, I don't want to go super in depth here because it's not really in the scope of this video, but make sure you've got a backup plan because RAID is not a backup. And if this is your entire business, you need to make sure that you have a plan in place that will protect you if the whole thing crashes. All right, so now with all that out of the way, let's talk about how we can gain access to this remotely. And there's really kind of three different options. One is that VPN server and just using local IP addresses. If you know how to set that up, great. I've got tutorials on how to set up OpenVPN, and you can just follow those. Essentially, every single employee will download OpenVPN onto their device, and then they will just use the local IP address, and that way, it is the most secure way. You don't have to have any ports open other than the VPN server, which is very secure, and it is about as secure as it gets. This does limit you from being able to share files publicly. So if one really critical thing you need to be able to do is share files within clients, you're not going to be able to use that. Options 2 and 3 allow you to do that with a level of security implication, because now they are making your NAS externally accessible. Just like how Dropbox is externally accessible, so does your NAS have to be if you want to share files with people publicly. The quickest and easiest way of doing that is with Quick Connect. So right here, you can just enable Quick Connect, and now boom, you're sharing files with people publicly. Really easy, and I have it enabled the entire time, and it makes it really easy. But now they're going to see this Quick Connect ID whenever you share files with them, and if you really want to use this as a very professional look, we can actually use a customized domain, which is really nice. I'm going to talk through this at a very high level. This is something that requires a fair amount of networking understanding, port forwarding, a whole bunch of stuff, and you have to understand how A records, C names, all that stuff works to set this up. So if you don't kind of understand what DNS is and all that stuff, this is probably not the best route for you. But if you do, Synology has a really cool thing called login portals. This allows you to point a domain at any application, and now you can run that application on ports 80 and 443, completely isolated out using a reverse proxy. This is a great way of opening up files to the web because you only have to open up Synology Drive to the internet, but not open up DSM. So it's a much more secure way of sharing out files with people because now, even if there's a crazy vulnerability in DSM, you've only opened up Synology Drive, not DSM. So it's a great way of having an extra level of isolation on out, and it looks very professional. So to do this, you're going to need three things. One, a public IP address on your router. If you don't have one, you can do it with Cloudflare, tunnels, and a few other things. It's going to be out of the scope of this video, but I have done it before. Two, you're going to need to be able to port forward ports 80 and 443 from your router to the NAS. And these are going to be used to run this on the web. Three, you're going to need a domain. So if you don't have your own domain, go out and buy one. And you're just going to go into your DNS provider and point the IP address of files.spacerex.co in my case to your router's public IP address. If you do not have a static IP address, you can use the built-in Synology DDNS to do that and use a CNAME. Once again, I'm talking at this at a very high level because it's quite complex and it requires a lot of understanding of this anyway. But that is what you can do. You can hire me as well. I do this all the time. But once you've pointed your public IP address of your router to files.spacerex.co in my case, now you can come into Synology Drive and you can input that under the domain settings right here. I'm going to use .ln, so I use my local network. But what this will do is this will act as a reverse proxy where anything coming in on port 80 and 443 going to this URL will just be pointed to Synology Drive. And now when you're sharing out links, it's going to be this URL. You don't see any quick connect. You don't see anything. And so it's a very professional way of setting this up. And you've got total access over it. You can also go in and use an additional access level to specify what locations can access this server and what cannot. So it's got a lot of value there as well. Finally, once we've set up HTTPS and set up our SSL certificate, you can click this right here, this HSTS, to make sure that anybody who's coming on port 80, unencrypted HTTP, will automatically be redirected to HTTPS 443. But we're going to do that later. Okay, so in my case, I'm not going to open this up to the internet, but I have done a pointer on here just to kind of quickly show how this would work. So now I can go to files.ln.spacerex.co, and boom, you can see I am brought directly to the NAS. And that is how that process works. The next thing I would go ahead and do is I would go into my certificates, and I would come in here and I would request a Let's Encrypt certificate for that exact same one. This is going to fail because files.ln.spacerex.co does not publicly resolve to the IP address of this NAS or port 80 and 443, so it's going to fail. But once you do that, and if yours is correct, you will now be able to have a properly signed SSL certificate for Synology Drive. So if we go to HTTPS, you would be able to get a secure connection, which is absolutely what you're going to want to do when you're sharing files out with clients. So this is going to fail, but I will show you what it will look like if it did succeed. So if it did succeed, what we would be able to do is we'd see that certificate right here. And what we would do is we'd tell our NAS, hey, Synology Drive, files.ln.spacerex.co, use that specific certificate, which would then work. So then you would get the properly signed SSL certificate. Everything looks great. Everything's really professional. And you're running this thing on your WAN properly. The last thing, if you did also want to use Synology Drive Share Sync, you would also have to open up port 6690 TCP to the NAS, just like 80 and 443. Okay, whew. I apologize, I had to kind of rush through that, but those are the steps that you take to make this publicly accessible. Once again, if you're not super familiar with networking, it's kind of hard to set up the first time, but if you understand networking and how all that works, it works very nicely, and you just don't have to worry about your certificates or anything, and Synology handles the rest. All right, well, that's going to be it for this tutorial. If you have any other questions, leave those down in the comments below. If you want to hire me to set this thing on up for you, go ahead and check out in the description below. There's a hire me button. All right, have a good one. Bye.